You sent over that research about text complexity in elementary school, the one called Does Text Complexity Matter in the Elementary Grades? A research synthesis of text difficulty in elementary students' reading fluency and comprehension.
Yeah,
And honestly, like going through this stuff, it kind of feels like we're at this turning point in
uh,
how we think about teaching kids to read, you know?
totally. Yeah, for a really long time, there's been this whole thing about matching a book perfectly to a child's reading level.
Right.
But now you've got these movements, especially with things like Common Core standards,
Yeah.
really pushing for using tougher texts in elementary classrooms.
Yeah.
So this research is really digging into what happens when these younger readers are working with more difficult stuff, how it affects how smoothly they read and how well they actually understand it.
Like, are we doing them a favor by giving them harder books, or are we setting them back?
Right.
So our goal today is to really pull out the big takeaways from this research.
What are the most important insights? What's surprising? What might not be obvious? We want to kind of give everyone listening a shortcut to understanding this whole complex issue.
Definitely.
And it's actually, it is complex
Yeah.
because the researchers actually started by looking at over 4,800 articles.
That's a lot.
It's a huge amount of research.
Mm-hmm.
And they whittled it down to 26 really strong studies.
Mm-hmm.
So this deep dive is based on a really carefully selected and analyzed body of work.
Definitely.
It's not just like, skimming the surface.
Well, no.
All right, so let's get into it.
Okay.
One thing that jumped out at me right away was this difference the researchers made between text complexity and text difficulty.
Yeah.
Could you break those down for us? What do they actually mean?
Yeah, that's a really important starting point.
Okay.
So text complexity, the way they define it, it's all about what's built into the text itself, regardless of who's reading it.
Right.
It's stuff like the sentence structure, the types of words used, how different ideas connect. One text can just be more complex than another based on those things.
Mm-hmm.
Test difficulty is different because it considers the reader, too.
Okay.
It's about how easy or hard that same text is for a specific person to read, thinking about their reading skills and even what they're trying to do with the text.
So, like, are they reading it for fun or do they have to write a report on it kind of thing?
Exactly. And for this discussion today, we're really going to focus on that text difficulty idea,
Okay.
how that interaction between the reader and the text actually works.
Got it. So it's not just about how hard a book looks.
Right.
It's about how hard it actually is for you to read it.
Exactly.
Now, the research talked about two main ways they looked at text difficulty in these studies.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through those approaches?
Absolutely. The first one was this concept of an individual reader text match.
Okay.
So basically, how difficult a text is depends on the individual student and how they interact with it. Researchers would look at whether a student could read it independently, no problem,
Oh.
whether it was at their instructional level where they might need some help,
Right.
or if it was just too hard for them, like a frustration level.
Okay.
And some studies used accuracy to figure this out. Like if a student makes more than, say, 10 or 20% errors, the text is probably too hard for that student.
Makes sense.
What's interesting is not every study relied on those official readability formulas.
Oh, really?
Yeah, some looked at those reading levels publishers put on books.
Right. Right.
Or they just watched how fast and accurately a student read to figure out the difficulty.
Okay, so it was really tailored to that specific kid.
Yeah, exactly, that one-on-one match.
And the other way they looked at text difficulty was more from a bigger picture view, right?
Yes, the second approach was what they called a group or grade text match.
Okay.
This one is more about the text overall readability, how suitable it is for a whole grade level. So, like, is this a good book for a typical second grader? And this is where those readability formulas come in.
The ones we all remember from school.
Exactly. And those formulas, they try to predict how hard a text will be based on stuff like the average sentence length, how complex the vocabulary is.
Right. The idea being that longer sentences and bigger words mean a harder text.
Yeah, you've got things like the Fry readability graph and the Dale-Chell formula. Those are the classic ones.
Yeah, I remember those.
They seem pretty straightforward.
They do.
But the research actually talks about some newer ways to look at this, too.
Really? So those old formulas, they're not the whole story anymore.
Well, they have their limitations.
Okay.
You see, these newer measures, like one called cometrics, they go deeper than just counting words and sentences.
Interesting.
They look at how well ideas in the text stick together, that's what we call cohesion, and how much it feels like a story or narrativity.
So it's not just about how long the sentences are, but how well they actually flow together.
Exactly. They give you a much richer picture. And the researchers found all kinds of different measures being used across these studies.
Like what?
Some looked at how many difficult words were in a text, how many unique words, how often common words showed up, how many multisyllable words there were, even how easy the words were to sound out.
Wow, so it's really a wide range of things they were looking at.
Yeah, it shows how many different angles researchers are using to try and understand this whole text difficulty idea.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've got these different ways of thinking about and measuring how hard a text is.
Right.
But the big question is, what does the research actually tell us about how that affects kids' reading?
Right.
Like, when those texts get harder, what happens?
Yeah, let's start with fluency.
Okay.
So, how smoothly kids could read.
Hmm.
Researchers usually looked at accuracy, how many words read correctly, rate how fast they read, and prosody, how expressive they sounded.
Got it.
And overall, the picture is pretty clear.
What'd they find?
So, with accuracy, almost all the studies, there was only one exception found that as text difficulty went up, accuracy went down.
Oh, interesting. So kids were making more mistakes when the texts were harder.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
Which suggests that, especially for kids who are still learning to read, giving them easier texts, the kind they can manage more comfortably, seems super important for building confidence and helping them read automatically.
Yeah, makes sense. If you're tripping over words all the time, you're not going to feel very good about reading.
Exactly.
Were there any more specific findings about accuracy?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like what?
They found this link between difficulty and accuracy was even stronger for students who are already struggling or just starting out. So those kids really need those easier texts.
Makes sense.
But here's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
How the text was presented actually made a difference.
Oh.
So even with a harder text, if kids read it repeatedly, their accuracy actually improved.
So practice really does help,
Yeah.
even with the tougher stuff.
It does. Interesting.
And if there were a lot of the same words in both easier and harder texts, kids tended to be more accurate too.
Like familiar words give them a boost.
Exactly.
Okay.
Even when teachers gave feedback during reading, that general pattern of lower accuracy with harder texts, it still held true.
So it's not just about support, it's also about the text itself.
Right, both play a role.
Okay, so with accuracy, the picture seems pretty clear.
Yeah.
What about reading rate? Like how fast kids were reading? Did the research show any patterns there?
Generally, yes. Most of the studies found that harder texts led to slower reading. Whether they measured that in total words per minute or words read correctly per minute.
Okay.
However, it wasn't quite as consistent as the accuracy findings.
How so?
Some studies actually didn't find any relationship between text difficulty and reading speed.
Interesting.
Like some kids just kept going at the same pace, even if they weren't understanding everything.
Right, I've seen that with my own kids. They just kind of power through sometimes.
And just like with accuracy, there were factors that played a role here. Like what?
Repeated reading helped improve rate, just like it did with accuracy.
Okay.
And reading aloud to a supportive adult or reading something the teacher had already read aloud,
Right.
those things also boosted reading speed, even with tougher texts.
So having that model to follow helps.
Definitely.
Oh.
But here's a big one. For more skilled readers and older elementary kids, like those in 4th and 5th grade,
Yeah.
that negative effect of text difficulty on their reading rate, it basically went away.
Really? So the more skilled you are as a reader, the less the difficulty of the text slows you down.
It seems that way, yeah.
Interesting. So it's like they develop strategies to keep their speed up, even when the text is harder.
Exactly.
Okay, now besides speed and accuracy, there's also prosody, that expressive part of reading.
Right, like reading with feeling.
What did the research say about how harder texts affect that?
This one's a bit more complicated.
Oh.
It really seemed to depend on the reader's skill level.
Mm.
So for those more skilled readers we were just talking about,
Yeah.
prosody wasn't always hurt by harder texts.
Interesting.
In fact, some studies found those skilled readers were still pausing at the right spots, like at the end of sentences,
Right.
and using their voice to emphasize things, just like good adult readers do. And that might have even helped them understand the tougher material better.
Like using those natural reading cues to make sense of it?
Exactly.
Okay.
But for less skilled readers, it was a different story.
How so?
When they hit those harder texts, their prosody tended to go downhill.
Like they lost that expression.
Yeah, they'd have more pauses, and often in places that didn't make sense grammatically.
Right, like breaking up the flow of the sentences.
Exactly. It disrupted that natural rhythm.
Okay, so it's almost like those harder texts threw them off their game.
Yeah, it made it harder for them to read smoothly and with expression.
Which makes sense. If you're already struggling to decode the words, you're not going to be able to focus on how you're reading them. All right, so we've talked about fluency, but let's get to the heart of it all, comprehension.
Yeah.
What did the research find about how text difficulty affects whether kids actually understand what they're reading?
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting and maybe a little less clear-cut. The main finding was that overall, when text difficulty went up, comprehension either went down or there was no real change.
Interesting. So no matter what, those harder texts didn't seem to make kids understand more.
Right, that was the big takeaway. No study found that harder texts actually improved comprehension in elementary school.
So just handing a kid a harder book doesn't magically make them a better reader.
Doesn't seem to.
Interesting.
That doesn't mean difficult texts aren't important, but this suggests that in those early grades, we shouldn't just be focusing on how hard the book is.
Right.
We also need to think about how kids are reading and the support they're getting.
Like, are they learning strategies to tackle those harder texts? Okay, so this idea that harder is always better, it's not really backed up by this research.
Not for elementary school, no.
Now, there was one study that mentioned this idea of an optimum level of difficulty,
Yeah.
where a moderate challenge could be better than something too easy or too hard.
Right.
But even that study said that pushing beyond a certain level of difficulty actually hurt comprehension. So there's a sweet spot, but if you go too far, it backfires.
It seems that way.
The researchers also talked about some reasons why the results about comprehension were a little more mixed.
Yeah.
Why was it harder to draw those really solid conclusions about comprehension compared to fluency?
One big factor was how they measured comprehension.
Okay.
Even in the same study, using different methods to test understanding could lead to different results.
Like what kind of different methods?
It's like if you ask multiple choice questions versus asking kids to explain things in their own words.
Right.
Those might give you different answers about how well a kid understands something.
That makes sense.
Comprehension is just a tougher thing to measure than fluency.
Yeah, it's so much more complex than just reading words accurately.
Exactly. It involves a lot of mental processes going on.
Right.
Another big thing was the reader's developmental level and their reading skills.
So like their age and how good a reader they already are.
Yeah, just like with fluency, younger and struggling readers showed a clear negative link between how hard the text was and how much they understood.
Okay.
But older, more skilled readers, sometimes there was no real connection.
So again, those more skilled readers are kind of resilient.
Yeah, it seems that way.
Their comprehension didn't necessarily get better with harder texts, but it didn't always get worse either.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And then the conditions of the studies mattered too.
Right, like what kind of support kids were getting.
Exactly, that's super important.
Okay, how so?
So some studies did interventions where kids got extra help while they were reading. And in those cases, sometimes there wasn't a big difference in comprehension across texts of different difficulty levels.
Really? So if you give kids the right support, they can handle those tougher texts without hurting their understanding.
It seems that way, yeah.
That's a really important takeaway for teachers, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's not just about the level of the book.
Right.
It's about the whole learning environment and how you're supporting kids.
Okay, so we've gone through a lot of research here.
We have.
What would you say is the most important thing someone listening to this should take away?
Okay, so for you, the listener, here's the big takeaway.
Okay.
Text difficulty really matters for elementary students. The biggest impact is on fluency. Harder texts mean kids are likely to read less accurately and more slowly.
Okay.
And when it comes to comprehension, harder texts usually mean kids understand less or there's no real change.
So it's not a guarantee that harder texts will make them better readers.
Exactly. We didn't find strong evidence for that.
All right, so that idea that harder is always better, it doesn't hold up for these younger grades.
Not really, no.
What this research really points to is the need for a more nuanced view.
Yeah, like a more balanced approach.
Right. It's not just about matching a book to a specific reading level, but it's also not about just throwing really complex texts at kids without the right support.
Exactly. And this has some pretty big implications, especially when we think about those educational policies that are pushing for more complex texts in elementary school.
Right. If we're going to ask kids to read harder stuff, we need to be really thoughtful about how we prepare them and give them the support they need.
Absolutely. We don't want to end up accidentally holding kids back by giving them texts that are just too difficult.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, What's one last thought you'd leave our listener with? Something to really chew on after hearing all this.
You know, this research leaves us with a really crucial question.
What's that?
Given all these findings, how can educators best balance the need to expose students to complex texts, which is important in the long run,
Right.
with the fact that those texts can actually hurt their fluency and comprehension, especially for those kids who are still learning to read well?
Right. It's a real balancing act.
It is.
So what's the answer?
It's not just about the texts themselves. It's about giving kids strategic support, the kind that's been proven to work, and really understanding each individual student's needs as a reader.
Like a personalized approach.
Exactly. That's the real challenge, but it's also the opportunity.
Makes you think, doesn't it?
It does.
Well, thanks for diving into this with us today. This has been really insightful.
My pleasure.
And to everyone listening, keep those questions coming. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
See you then.